You're listening to a 4x4 Radio Network podcast.
Hey, Jeepers. Kevin here. Welcome to show 118 of On the Trail with Kevin and Scott. I'm Kevin, as I just mentioned, the engineer, the guy that, tends to read instructions, use the right tools, and follow those instructions, unless I'm doing something creative, in which case, we'll put the instructions aside for the moment. But then again, I realized that I become the owner, the warranty, and the repair service. And you are?
And I am Scott. I'm the one that Kevin handed me some piece of paper, so I have to read. So I'm your name here, and I'm just kidding. I'm the slapstick parts guy with a continual mission to ruin Kevin's poor train of thought, and ruin my own train of thought as I sit here and try and think of something else to say. But remember, while we will share what we do, oh my God,
we will share what works for us as well
as what didn't, like this intro. Remember, it's always up to you to do your research.
Decide what you want to do with your Jeep.
Yes.
Do your research, read the instructions, and
follow them.
That's what we're asking. Even though I joke about it, I go through them repeatedly, often with Scott, going, okay, no, right. Righty-tighty. No, righty's this way. Oh, okay.
The other right.
The other right. All joking aside, we have just come in to take a break from the heat. We're in the lower 90s, which is not, I'm sad to say, unusual here in Florida for this time of year. As we record this in, May the... somethingth in the middleith, near the endeth, actually. And it was hot, but we're out there doing a steering box swap on Scott's Jeep and putting in an up-spec'd box, getting rid of the Mercedes box. Not that that's a bad box, but it's harder to get parts for. Every year we get further away from Chrysler, Mercedes-Benz, Mercedes, Chrysler.
Daimler-Benz.
That was it, Daimler-Benz or Daimler-Chrysler. Mm-hmm. So parts get more and more expensive, and so we're putting an AGM box, and we already got the short shaft conversion. Mm-hmm. We got the correct pressure hose, and I'll admit it, I forgot that I ended up swapping out the low pressure hose, the return hose, to a early gen hose as well, and he didn't bring one. Not his fault, mine. And you're supposed to be able to tweak the original 0506 to fit.
Yeah.
Don't you believe it? It don't work, folks. No. Not without kinking. So fortunately, our friends at O'Reilly's, hashtag not a sponsor, are kindly kind of rushing one in, and they said, it'll be ready by 4:30. So we said, well, in the meantime, we'll go into the air conditioning and cool off, dry off, and record the next show.
Recirculated air.
Yeah, it's pretty sad when that actually takes precedence over outside.
Yeah.
But
go outside and play. We'll melt.
The good news is everything that needed to disconnected without breaking.
Yes.
So it should be a pretty straightforward reinstallation. So we'll see how that goes. We may be out there in the middle of the night, but then it'll be cooler.
Exactly. And then we get the skeeters.
So
like donating blood.
Yeah, in Florida, yes, there's an hour here that's absolutely critical. In most places, it's like that. The dusk hour, they just swarm. Yeah. And while the backside of my property is gorgeous with a 3+ acre pond, it's also
a 3+ acre pond
full of the mosquito larvae. The fish and everything eat as much as they can. We have some of the biggest and fattest turtles that are gorging on them, and the mosquitoes go, "Yeah, we'll make more."
Exactly. Crunch all you want, we'll make more. So being carried away by a Dorito.
With that, I think it's about time for us to get started on the show topic. We've had a last couple of interviews with folks like that and industry insiders. And, actually I've got one more industry insider. What?
You have been promising stuff about an engine swap for 2 shows now. We are facing a mutiny of listeners here, buddy.
Yeah. And your point is?
We need to get to this teasing that you've been doing about, because we covered a couple bases that people have asked us, and we said, nah, not our bag, but it's more fun to do it with other people's money.
That's who we're going to talk to.
Aha.
Talk about. Folks, what we're going to talk about is first a big shout out to Bob, last name withheld,
Yes.
because I don't want anybody stealing his Jeep. Bob's came to me with a request for some assistance. Actually, he was referred to me. He was doing a LS transplant into a 95 YJ.
Right.
And it's a very nice YJ, but it was a 4-cylinder with a stick.
Right.
So good stiff headwind, and you have trouble getting above 45. And he now sports an LM7, which is the 5.7,
Quite an upgrade.
with a 4L60E automatic. And we're going to do a little bit of a discussion. But why I talk about a manufacturer's is this is a review. Because what was so intriguing to me is, we've talked before about the fact that I have assisted with a 6.0 LS swap with a 6L95E that's still not done. Details still are outstanding, and it's been almost 5 years. Now, the Jeep is together. It does drive, but it was a frame off, almost show level build, and it's still getting detailed and take care of this and this little tweak and that little tweak.
Yeah.
Bob's LS transplant started 2 weeks ago, and it's driving.
Yeah.
And the key here is the 6.0 transplant was a junkyard. Got this engine here, got this transmission here, was supposed to be a budget upgrade.
Right.
And Bob chose a full-on Novak, not a sponsor, but a full-on Novak engine kit. So we're going to talk about it, having in the last, since this show's been up, I've done 2 versions of the same basic swap. No, not the same horsepower. Admittedly, the 6.0 with the 6L95E is about a 400 horse engine, and this one is about a 285 or 290 horse 4-speed transmission. But we're still talking about taking a GM V8 LS frame and stuffing it in both of them are essentially YJ or CJ tubs and frames on leaf springs.
Yeah.
And so they really have a lot of comparisons. So we're going to dive into this and talk about the differences, the costs, the difficulties, and whether or not it's a garage-friendly project.
Yeah, and that's when Kevin and I kind of front these emails and questions about engine swaps, and we talk about doing your research. And again, I can hear some people saying, well, I got an engine for $5,000 and I welded everything in, did it all myself, and it was a junkyard cheap build. And
It is. And that's actually funny you said that, because that's kind of the lead in.
Yeah.
When Bob came to me and can you help me? Yeah, I'd be glad to. I think it'd be a lot of fun. And I said, so what are you expecting for this swap? And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, what do you expect out of this swap? Let's get your expectations in line with reality.
Yep.
And make sure that what I'm thinking is lined up with what you want.
Let's bench build.
Even though the crate's sitting there, which makes it hard not to drool. And they do ship it in a pretty crate and a little frame and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And he was, well, I just want it in the Jeep to run. Okay, but how do you want it in there? We can do it with Scotch locks and duct tape. And it'll work. I don't know how long it'll work and how reliable it'll be. Oh, no. I want it to run. And he looked at me and he hit the magic nerve. He said, I want my wife to be able to drive it. And I said, okay, so we're talking about step in, put your foot on the brake, turn the key, put it in gear, and drive. He said, yeah, okay. That's actually a level of an expectation.
Right. Do you want all the gauges to work?
Yeah. Do you want the gauges to work? Are you going to have aftermarket instrumentation? What's your plan for exhaust? What's your plan for fuel delivery? How do you think we're going to put all this together?
What's your plan for engine cooling? What's your plan for drive shafts?
Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Because that got interesting. So we sat down and we had that little talk. And he said, well, I don't want to go overboard. Do I need to get new gauges? I said, well, I don't know. We'll find out. So I did the research for him. I went and found the factory service manual for a 95 Jeep Wrangler YJ.
Yeah.
And learned some really neat stuff that anybody doing a YJ, get a mid-year dash. Well, and I'll tell you why. It bolts into your dash, and it looks like the early ones that came with the carburetors and the weird Renix ignition system and all those things like that. But you can drive it with the GM equipment.
Interesting.
Yeah. So what did we do? Well, Novak's kit. Let's talk about that kit for a minute so that you understand I'm going to be on. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, let's say from a parts person's perspective, the 3 Ps, let's be honest, when you look at a Jeep engine swap, some people just slapdash, like you said, Scotch lots and zip ties and duct tape. But some people like the curb appeal, they like it to look nice. And when I saw the video of them opening the crate, I saw an engine that it looked like parts were freshly painted. Like you were buying a crate motor. It looked that way from the photograph.
It is. The Novak kit, let's talk about the Novak kit. First thing, they bench build with you. They don't just sell you a kit. They go, what's your Jeep? What year? Is it lifted? What's your gear ratio? What's your tires? What are your plans for this? What are your plans for that? And they will craft a kit for you. Okay. And that is awesome. So this Novak kit showed up, obviously, with a fully overhauled zero-timed engine, a fully overhauled zero-time 4L60E. Computer was included. Wiring was included. Computer was flashed to Bob's specifications. Did he want, they said you really need to keep the first 2 O2 sensors for the fuel management, but your year of Jeep did not require the aftercats. We're going to put them in the harness, but you don't have to use them because we'll turn them off. So they turned them off at his request. Now they document that in case you live in one of those states that says, oh, no, you better do that. But, Bob didn't have to here in Florida. They radiators provided with the mounts to fit in a YJ grill assembly. Transmission cooler that will fit in the grill of a YJ, is provided separate because they found that the radiator is not quite sized. There's not enough real estate to use an in-radiator transmission cooler. So they provide a separate one. That's given. The hoses to hook it up are provided. The radiator hoses are not. They're on you. Okay, that's the first thing you got to go buy. They do the wiring harness down to a fuse box, and they left us, count them, 7 wires to connect. All right.
Okay, that's a lot of when you've talked about wiring before about stripping out certain deep pinning a wiring harness, they've already taken that stuff.
They've done all that work for you, and then reloomed it in good high temperature split loom.
Sweet.
If you have air conditioning, they can provide an AC pump. Bob doesn't. He said, so I don't need it, but so it's not there. So it has the right belt on the engine for the accessories. It had the alternator. It has a power steering pump. It had all the fittings and the air filter to mock up an intake along with the mass airflow sensor and temperature assembly, and a K&N type cone air filter. It was just amazing, everything that they had in there. They even included the decoded digital signal matcher because the RPM output on the GM V8 is different than the RPM output on a 4-cylinder Jeep.
Of course, yeah.
So, but I mean, it was provided in the kit.
What about fluids?
I honestly don't remember if he bought them or if they came in the kit. I believe he had to provide. No, they did provide most of the fluids.
Oh, okay.
Some he had to get, like radiator fluid was his, but I believe they sent the engine oil and the transmission fluid, or even if he bought those. Let's say the kit's dry. I'll be safe that way. But that's pretty astounding. Motor mounts. Mm-hmm. Where to put the motor mounts was provided. That's not a small thing, folks. You can waste a lot of time going an inch further back. Oh, should I slide it to the right? Should I slide it to the left? They've done all the math on that stuff for the engine angle, how it sits. All that was provided. And Bob is meticulous. He took care of, once the 4 was out, one of our friends, Ron over at Red Scorpion Fab Works, loaned him the use of a stall for a day to pull the engine out. And the engine came out. I was there when it came out. And he was actually able to sell the parts. He kept the transfer case. Oh, Novak gives you the adapter from the 4L60E to the Jeep NP231J, along with a new input spud shaft. So you break your transfer case out, change the input shaft socket that hooks on the transmission, and then your transfer case bolts up to the transmission. Just with the 6 factory bolts.
You're done.
They gave you the Novak shifter for the transfer case. Bob did not have them provide the shifter for the 4L60E, but rather chose his own and went with a... just went out of my head, folks. Sorry.
Like a Hearst or?
No, but it's a big name. Oh, well, it'll come to me later. But it's the same one we used on the other Jeep as ended up being. He got a floor-mounted shifter, cable operated, to put the transmission in and out of gear. So let's talk a little bit, though. You know, the kit was very, very, very complete.
Right.
Now, at face value, it's a gut-wrenching $14,000 delivered. All right. And that really will take your breath away.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that on the 6.0 6L95E, we spent way more than that. Mm-hmm. By the time you get the engine, by the time you have it overhauled, if you're going to overhaul it, by the time you have the transmission overhauled, the programming costs to have an engine and transmission and ECU that were not put together at the factory, synchronized or married, as the dealerships call it, and then properly tuned was not cheap either.
Well, one of the things I just want to touch on, and I gotta strike that from the record. But anyways, a friend of ours on a certain Jeep page has bought a LS swap motor, and he cracked open the valve covers. And I don't know about the rest of everybody, but I throw away a perfectly good vehicle, when I throw it to the junkyard, and the engine was sludged up.
Yeah.
So his $2,500 junkyard find.
Yeah.
Is now sitting with $4,000 in parts ready to be sent to the machine shop, and done. So that's another thing I think about.
You're going to be up in probably anywhere from $6,000 to $8,000 for an overhauled engine if you put them on equal, and then you've got the same cost in the transmission. You know? So if you start looking at those numbers, now I'm not saying that some of you are all, I can hear it already, people screaming, oh, it doesn't cost that much here. And, okay, it may not, but I'm going with an average cost. I Googled online, the average overhaul cost. Scott does work at a dealership and can get me the extreme cost if you have it done at the extreme.
Well, just on that side alone, ancillaries, like you talked about all the stuff in the kit. Mm-hmm. When I rebuilt the 4-cylinder in my YJ, okay, AutoZone, this is way back in the day, had a little thing. If you spend $20, you get a free stamp in your card. Yeah. And then when you get 5, you get a $25 gift or $20 gift card, right?
Yeah. Yep.
20 for 20, you get 5, right? Well, before I built it, I literally picked out every piece I had to replace. So I'm looking at coolant temp sensors, radiator hoses, belts, all this kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So for 5 weeks, every day on the way home, I stopped and picked something up. When I was done, I had $180 in gift cards. So do the math right there. That was just add-on parts to my engine for the rebuild.
Right. So, and that reminds me of the other thing that Novak did. The LS temperature system is a digital. And let's actually take a step back and clarify some discussion points just so that everybody were on the same page.
Yeah.
In my world, there's 3 basic information instrumentation systems. There's mechanical, a cable drive speedometer, an oil line to a back of an oil pressure gauge.
Right.
Those are mechanical systems. A sight glass thermometer in your radiator cap, like the old cars. I'm talking 20s. And that was how you read it. Those were mechanical gauges. The next ones are electric gauges. Okay. The electric gauges are the oil pressure switch that you screw in and has one wire to the gauge, and it's a variable resistance. The temperature sensor, that's a variable resistor that feeds the gauge. You put 12 volts to it, hook it to the gauge, and the gauge reads it. The last kind are digital. That gauge doesn't know it's even a gauge. All it knows is it's a stepper motor, or an air motor, they call them. Mm-hmm. And the computer says, hey, move to 3/4 sweep, move to half sweep. Okay, it doesn't even know it's reporting on oil or anything. It just knows it's moving, it's turning a certain point.
Right.
The data comes from the interpretation of the computer from its sensors. And therein lies a lot of your swap issues. The more modern engines that we buy are digital output. Our dashboards ain't. Okay, let's just leave it there. They're either A, mechanical, or B, electrical.
It's like 8-track engine on an MP3 dash.
Okay. It's an interesting cut. And so we were looking at that, and I started doing some research on it, and I realized that Novak had provided in the LS heads, on one bank was this factory temperature sensor to the ECU. On the other, they'd put an adapter specific to the Jeep sender. So from the oil pressure sensor in the back of the valley on the LS went to the computer. The one down by the fuel, oil filter,
Right.
was a plug for
The Jeep Dash.
the Jeep Dash. So we were able to we ended up buying new sensors just because he didn't trust the old ones. They were old enough, but there was less than $50 in that. And reusing the original harness leads, we actually brought the Dash back to life. In fact, I'll go ahead and tell you the punchline. Every single gauge in that YJ works. The only one that needed any adaptation was the tachometer. And that's because the 4-cylinder engine put out, as weird as it sounds, a different pulse count than the V8. And it wasn't the way you'd think. You'd say, oh, yeah, well, okay, the 4-cylinder will read half, will put out half the pulse count of a V8. No, RPM is RPM, But for some reason, we had to double the output from the GM engine to make the TAC read correctly on the Jeep Dash.
Okay.
The Dakota Digital has a very simple function for that. Bip, bip, bip. Okay, it's set. Lock it in and give it ignition power when it's on and feed in the GM output line there and push it into the Jeep Dash.
And away we go.
And away we go. And that's one of the things that I was going to say that's really wild. We discovered about that mid-generation YJ Dash. Looks the same as all of them. Same kind of a bar-type dash, 2 gauges, and then the little row that kind of runs above the shifter there.
It was funny. When I pulled mine out because I replaced the light bulbs in them.
Yep.
The back of the dash actually said VDO.
Yep.
That's kind of weird.
That's a manufacturer. You must have had also the electric dash.
Yes, I did.
And what's neat in those mid-years is that the dash, and there was an ECU in that year there was an early ECU in that YJ. It and the instrument cluster were parallel. In fact, the sensor came off and the wire split, and one went to the ECU and one went to the dash. So you were actually reading in that mid-year the sensor, what it was telling the computer. You were reading it without the computer interpreting it for you.
Interesting.
So you could take the computer out of line and your oil pressure gauge still works. Everything still works except the tachometer. And that's not because of the computer's fault. It's that I took the engine away and had a new engine in there.
Well, let's be honest. This was a Jeep. I did have to tap it a couple times.
Yeah. But, and there's a couple other things we did. We created a custom circuit for the speedometer drive because the speedometer drive in the earlier years was 8 volts to the sensor that's on your transfer case. Ground was to the data ground, both of which were provided by the ECU. It was the power step-down unit. Of course, we took the old ECU away, and the GM doesn't produce that kind of thing. In the later TJs, it's a 5-volt circuit. It's exactly the same part, exactly the same methodology. The computer provides a 5-volt, feed, and then you get a third wire that comes back off the sensor that reads the pulse count of 8,000 pulses per mile, and how fast that happens is your speed. Well, with a little help from the guys at Novak, one of them has a YJ. He says, I just feed it with 12 volts and ground it to the chassis.
I remember you talking about that because it's like just straight 12 volts. It won't burn it out?
Nope. And now what I did was created a little circuit off of the dash instrumentation. I picked up on the key-on switch that feeds the dash instruments to provide that 12 volts, and then grounded it to the data ground that you use in the OBD2 system, which is just a battery ground, but it's a clean one. It doesn't go and get tied in where the spark plugs, where the coil packs and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And generally, the unit that you hook on the transfer case, the little Speedo drive unit, handles 12 volts just donkey hoary. And he says he's been running his for 5 years and hasn't had a hitch. When I looked up online, they didn't even give a voltage spec on that sender unit.
How were the gauges when you did the other Jeep, the 6.0?
Well, that one was a little weird because the gauges were trashed to start with because they were CJ They weren't YJ gauges.
Gotcha.
And the owner requested that we put the newfangled electronics in. And so in a way that was easier, but now those are electronic dash pieces. They look like it,
right,
but they don't actually hook to any sensor. They just take data off of the CAN bus and report what the computer tells them to report. And if any of you followed any of the technical, you know that sometimes the computers don't report exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
Okay. So from that perspective, we had a pretty straightforward time wiring. 3 days from engine drop-in to lighting it off. Most of that time was wiring. Decided to do it as cleanly as possible. The YJ harness showed that other than the starter, I could get everything I needed through the 2 plug-in harnesses along the firewall that fed the original engine harness, and we'd save those. And so we actually used the original wiring looms, stripped out what we didn't need, lengthened a few things, shortened a few things, and reconnected them to the GM harness. And folks, just so you know, to be nice to the next guy working on this Jeep, I made a little probably 12-page booklet that Bob now has that says this line was connected to this line, these colors, codes, GM, this color code, here's where I made the connection, and here's why I did it.
So you gave
Because let's be honest, anytime you work on something that somebody else was working on and you open it up and you go, what the bleep was he thinking? I decided to give him a little book that says, well, this is what I was thinking.
And this is why I did it.
This is why I did it. And before you go, oh my God, that took hours. No, it took about 45 minutes to write down.
Yeah.
So technically, let's roll back and summarize. The motor mounts were welded in where Novak recommended. Did the motor fit? Yes. What did it do front to aft? Believe it or not, the transmission mount dropped into the factory holes in the skid plates.
Sweet.
Okay. That meant the factory drive shafts fit. Now, he still had new ones made because he did a lift kit at the same time.
Yeah.
So he did have to adjust things like that. But none of that really changed anything.
Right.
What else did he have to pay for it? We talked about radiator hoses. Mm-hmm. Transmission coolant hoses were provided, but radiator hoses depend on how you configure the front of your engine, whether you're going to do your intake over here, over there, so that was a little different. Our choice of mounting the ECU, we put it on the driver's fender well because it made it easier to make a lot of the connections, but that bumped the washer bottles and washer pumps for his windshield washers out of commission. Yeah. There's room for them up front, more in a TJ type location. He hasn't done that yet, but as he says, I'm not worried about it. Yeah, I'll get there. That's not rocket science to move a washer bottle around. The shifters, Novak provided their mechanical shifter for the transfer case. It mounts like many of them. It bolts to a couple of bolts on the transfer case mount, the 6 rings where the transfer case bolts the transmission. And then they give you like a copper wire with a thick foam, like 1/2 inch diameter foam, 3/4 inch diameter, whatever. And you bend that to shape into the mount area. And then once you've got that where you're happy, they give you a 1/2 inch rod or whatever in steel, threaded at the other end for the shifter, and you go find somebody with a torch that can heat that red hot and bend it to that shape. Fortunately, I have an oxyacetylene set. We were able to heat it up right here and get it in the shape. The low car shifter, that's what I couldn't remember. He got the low car shifter. He mounted the low car shifter, interestingly enough, in the exact same position where the 4-speed shifter for his manual came through. They gave him, as part of the kit, they also gave him a new transmission hump cover.
Oh.
All right. And then he had to cut the hole in it. It's aluminum, so I'm not real thrilled with it. It's a little soft. We had to put some stiffeners underneath it to keep it from flexing under the shifter. But the way Bob put everything in, the shift lever and everything, he was able to actually reuse his manual transmission YJ shift boot set.
Sweet.
So they popped right over it, and it actually looks like a manual, other than it's got a push button in the middle of the shift knob, and it says Prindle on it,
That's for the ejecto seat, guys.
They did provide the throttle control module to the GM, as well as the accelerator pump. The gas pedal, the electronic gas pedal was all provided. He had to fab a bracket. So
right.
There's his part there. He had to fab a bracket, and he decided to trim the GM pedal arm because he felt it stuck out too far. He wanted it back a little more in the classic. They gave him the parts and pieces to pull the cross pin out and take the clutch brake assembly apart and put in a full-width automatic style brake pedal.
That was, again, these are small little ancillary things that you wouldn't think.
But they add up if you're going to buy them yourself, if you can even find them. So, the wiring system, it had feeds. The check engine light works in the Jeep from the ECU of the Chevy. TAC, speedo, oil pressure, water temperature, and charging all work off of the GM system with no modifications. The only one, like I said, was the adapter in the tachometer feed. Right. And we spent extra time. I mean, we could have slapped those wires together in a heartbeat, but we took our time. Some of them I didn't use the factory connection simply because the wire would have come out of the dash, gone through the firewall, gone all the way over to the passenger side, and then come all the way back over to the driver's side for the GM connection. Yeah. So we de-threaded and pulled those back. As it was, Scott, there are, at the end, 5 wires that are in a non-Jeep connector.
Okay.
And one of them is in a single, and that's the higher amperage starter feed that the key comes out, cranks over to the GM purple wire. It's a yellow wire in the Jeep to the purple wire. And we did it for 2 reasons. One, I didn't have any really higher amp in multi-pack connectors that I felt comfortable using. So we used a single that was a high amp, and it also gives him a real quick theft prevention because you can open the hood, pull that off, and that thing won't start no matter what.
Yeah.
Then we used a 4-pin weather pack for all the other ones, and they were some of the dash feeds that I could have gone to a factory connector, but again, they were on the wrong side of the Jeep. It was easier to pull wires back out of the harness and shorten them up and do a second connector, or do this little 4-pack connector right below the brake booster. Brake system works fine. Novak gives you the hose to hook up to your brake boosters. Even tells you where the correct port on the GM unit is.
What about fuel pump? Does the factory EFI pump for the YJ work enough for the...
It did. It actually puts out 58 PSI and makes the GM happy.
Cool.
There was an interesting point. There was one hitch, and it wasn't a major hitch, but here's what happened is the YJ of his year, and it varies. I was looking in the factory service manuals, the 95 uses a single feed wire back to the gas tank to power the fuel pump, the sender, and those kinds of things. Those are the 2 major ones. But that's a 30 amp circuit back there. If you go to the relays, a 40 amp relay fed by a 30 amp maxi fuse in the Jeep box under the hood.
Right.
The Novak's box that they give you, and they do give you a little relay box with fuses in it for the GM engine. Same one that we chose when we did the other one, so I felt very comfortable with that choice.
Nice.
But the fuel, they only had a 10 amp feed and a 30 amp relay. Now, I could have changed the fuse out, but I was looking at the lead wires that were feeding that circuit, and it just...
Yeah.
So what we did, and I told Bob, I gave him a choice. I said, we can rewire. I can chop the Novak harness to grab the feed, for triggering the fuel pump, or I can, we can chop into the Jeep system, or we can hybridize it. Or I said the simplest one, and it not my happy place, but it works, is I can use the GM relay to trigger the Jeep relay.
Okay.
And I said, it is a double relay system, but that way we're not voiding Novak's warranty on their wiring. And we're making sure that we're feeding the Jeep fuel pump and sender assembly with what it's expecting.
Sometimes you got to think outside the box.
And so we did that. We fed a relay with a relay. And yes, I'm sure the guy who's going to look at it is going to go, what the hell was he thinking?
This is why.
And I basically said, this is why. It was a choice to be made. Could it have been done a little simpler? Absolutely. Because it meant going into the Jeep box and disconnecting the fuel pump feed system from the ASD system and then turning control of that over to the GM system. Yeah. But it works. It just means if he has a fuel pump issue, he's got to check two relays and two fuses. Hey, he's like, I can handle that.
Technical tap them both.
Yeah. So, that was probably the only real thing. Now, I do have to give a shout out. If anybody from Novak's listening, Jeff on your helpline. Jeff, you're awesome, dude. Jeff took more than a few calls from us. Somehow Bob's kit arrived missing the explanation of hooking up the wires. And they would have happily sent us another one, but we were in the middle of it. And I said, okay, look, I've done this before. Just tell me there's a transmission interface with the brake signal. Do you want it to go high on braking or go low on braking? And he's like, okay, you do know what you're talking about. I said, yeah. He says, we've already done an inverter because the GM expects it to go to ground. All right. But most brake systems are, when you step on the brake pedal, they actually provide power to the light, so they go high. Right. Whereas the GM's power goes to the light and comes back to the switch, and you break the pedal, it goes to ground. And you do just a relay to invert the signal, and they'd already done that. So I said, okay, fine. So I can just tap into the the brake light circuit. He goes, yep. And so he was answering a lot of questions that are supposed to be in the write-up, but we didn't get the write-up. They never once squawked. They never once said, look, we're just going to mail it to you or go download or anything. They took every call. They answered every question very professionally. Like I said, they helped us work out the speedometer feed issue. That was absolutely fantastic. Great guys. And the funniest thing about this was I was trying to bump the motor over just to kind of bump it over without firing to get oil pressure, make sure that I had good oil pressure and all that kind of stuff. And it wouldn't bump, and it wouldn't bump. And I got in there with my power probe, and it's like, I can't make the starter turn over. And I realized that the relay power feed for the starter motor was also tapped in on their wiring to the ignition circuit. And this is what happens when you're tired, folks. You don't even think, okay, so I got to get power on the pink wire as well as the purple wire. So I grabbed them both together, held them to the starter lead, held them to the power probe and bumped it. Do you know that dang engine turned less than half a resolution before it lit off and fired up?
Whoops.
Roared to life, open headers. Needless to say,
everyone's awake now.
Explicit and let go of the wires, and it shut itself off immediately like a good engine should. It's like... And Bob kind of looked at me and says, yeah, it's ready to run.
Supplies.
My thoughts on the Novak kit. It's really an outstanding package that seems to be well thought out, well detailed. There's a few things left for you to work through, as your Jeep may vary from what they've got, but they'll listen to you and work with you. We had an issue with the power steering. They didn't even hesitate and tell him that, it wasn't the problem with the power steering pump. They replaced the power steering pump for him. Yeah. It wasn't the power steering pump. It was the fact that their power steering pump is obviously for a later model Chevy, which is a high flow, lower pressure, whereas the old Saginaw systems in the mid-90s were lower flow, high pressure. And I didn't realize it, and Bob didn't even know that was an issue. But if you look at the Saginaw boxes, the noses where the steering shaft comes in on the high pressure, lower flow are much smaller because they're not moving as much fluid. Okay.
Seems reasonable.
And that was stalling the fluid flow, causing the pump to short cycle and go through the blow off valve to the point that if you started the engine and ran it for 45 seconds, the pump got hot. Scalding hot. Ooh. Would boil the fluid hot. We replaced his with a Dakota box. Solved the problem.
Sweet.
And then after probably the third drive, the alternator quit. And that was just a failure in a part. Yeah. 2 bolts, 1 tensioner, back in business. Bob took the opportunity to upgrade the alternator. Yeah.
Power.
Yeah, we had to provide our own cable from the alternator to the battery because they didn't know where that was. So that was another $20 right there. So fluids you have to buy. Radiator hoses you have to buy. And shifter for the transmission, you have the option to buy through them or you can buy your own.
Yeah.
And then your own collection of proper heat shrink, wire ties, loom, and that kind of stuff to neaten it up to whatever level you're happy with is on you. But it definitely lit off. It ran. It shifts beautifully. It's not one of the Maxi LS's. It's about 285 horse. Mm-hmm. But compared to what he had with about 65 to 90 horse.
On a good day.
On a good day. He's not going to have any trouble on the freeway.
No.
Around town, it's kindly said spirited. And we'll let you know on gas mileage. I'm going to bet that it actually beats the 4-cylinder soundly after he gets done learning and getting out of playing it, burying the pedal when he has the chance to.
Yeah.
When somebody goes, oh, I'm going to pass that Jeep, and he goes, oh, no, you're not.
No.
The Jeep handles the power far better than I expected. I wasn't sure how YJ was going to handle it because the CJ, the narrow CJ springs move a lot under the torque, and it does tend to make it feel a little squirrely under hard power. The YJs have a wider spring, it's almost a half an inch to 3/4 an inch wider than the CJ springs, and it handled the power. I drove it a couple of times, and it was a very solid vehicle.
Yeah, you made a comment about how it didn't lift the nose.
Yeah, it doesn't, and that's one of the things that, for me, comparing it to my TJ on the coils will tend to lift the nose a little easier. A leaf spring, your leaf spring mounts are such that it'll lift somewhat, but it definitely doesn't lift like a coil spring does.
Right.
A coil spring provides really no negative force on the axle going down.
Okay.
If you think about it, until the shock bottoms out. If a coil doesn't pull back, remember how much you have to compress it to even get it in there?
Yep.
So you're going to tend, whereas a leaf spring, as soon as you go past neutral, it's pulling backwards on you.
Yeah, it's like nope, going back.
So I will definitely give, I would say, a 9.5 out of 10 to Novak for that kit. Obviously, they can't control some of their aftermarket suppliers for the parts and the alternators, but still, we had to chase those parts down. The information. I would have liked to have seen a second set of electrons going, Bob should have gotten a note or something like that says, hey, here for an electron copy, because then I could have pre-studied it and probably maybe have done it in 2 days rather than 3.
Right.
But those are really, really minor, because every question I called, they were more than willing to take the time to answer me right then and there. Mm-hmm. Customer support was outstanding. Fitment, details, information, there just really wasn't anything that I would call as a negative. And yes, you can kind of cough at the price, but I'm going to tell you, if you try and do it in pieces, you're probably going to spend that much.
Yeah, one of the common phrases when I was in the auto parts store is, whatever you think a engine swap's going to cost, double it. So if you think it's going to be $5,000, it's going to be $10,000.
Right. And 14 to have it delivered to your door in a crate. Yep. Painted, cleaned, ready to go. I mean, you give me a battery, I could have fired that thing in the box. Put oil in it, of course. Yeah. But a big shout out to Novak, a big shout out to Jeff at Novak for the help. Again, thanks. Bob for sharing this with me and an opportunity to go through the build with him and compare it and contrast it to a piece-by-piece build. Now, if you're out to build your engine, your transmission for your Jeep and make it one of a kind, do it yourself. By all means, take the time. You can spread the money out that way, But, Bob was looking at an engine swap, and when you say, okay, right there, I'm going to swap engines, unless you're putting exactly the same engine back in, I'm going to say even with a junkyard engine or an overhaul engine, you're probably looking at $5,000 or $6,000.
Oh, easy. Because I worked for the level 1 powertrain dealership for GM. Mm-hmm. And, you would buy what they call the repower kits. In other words, LA. I showed you. I actually, a quick little byline. I sent Kevin a picture. I said, "Hey, Kevin, what kind of frame is this to this vehicle?" And L.A. is the owner, and I said, "Watch this. He's going to come back and he'll call it." He goes, "You sure?" I said, "You don't know this guy." And sure enough, he's like, "Yeah, it's an X frame, probably a '60s or late '50s Impala." And I'm like, I showed L.A. He goes, "Man, he is good." But L.A.'s going through a repower, right?
Yeah, and his, by the way, was a '64 Impala.
Yeah, and he paid I think it was like $3,000 or $4,000 for the engine. He paid
As a core.
No, he bought the GM repower.
Oh, okay, the repower. Yeah.
So
Okay.
he's about $3,000 or $4,000 for the engine. Now that was an engine and 10.
Yeah, that's it.
That was it.
No wiring, no computer. That's just
No pulleys, no nothing.
Mhm. It's a long block, is basically.
Exactly. Now he also bought his transmission. Again, he got a core, rebuilt it, and did a few things. So he's out, $2,200 for the transmission. He still has no pulleys, still has no pulley kits or anything like that at all.
Motor mounts, et cetera, et cetera,
et cetera, et cetera. So, and I remember selling the fuel injected repower kits for fuel injection, and it would come with the fuel injector computer, pulleys, no fuel system, no power steering system, no transmission.
Yeah.
You would have the box of catalytic converters for you, and that was $12,000.
Yeah. So we're not that far off with 14 crated, and that, by the way, the 14 included shipping. Okay. So yeah, it's a big number because you're paying 99% of it at once.
And someone else to do the work.
And somebody else to do the work. So you're paying a pretty healthy convenience factor. But as far as convenience factors go, that's a really reasonable convenience factor.
It is.
So again, hats off to Novak. I'm impressed. I look forward to a chance to actually meeting them and talking with them other than on their service line. So hopefully we can work that in somewhere in the future. If you guys have questions out there or comments, email them to us or post them on our Facebook page. I'd love to chat with folks about specifics. It really was, for me, a fun build. I've never put together a V8 swap so fast.
Yeah.
It really was remarkable to have it pre-engineered and it actually been run in as an assembly. And, they knew that the engine would fire, the transmission would shift, that everything works. And for us, it was almost as simple as swapping in, another engine. And it could have been shorter, but Bob took a couple of days beforehand after he pulled the engine out, and he towed the Jeep back home on a flat, on
rollback.
No, he did car carrier? He flat towed it home.
Flat towed, okay.
He had the tongue assembly on that Jeep, and cleaned it up. He mounted the motor mounts in position with self-drilling screws just to hold them. Double check, triple check, cleaned up, painted everything. Made the engine bay look brand spanking new.
Yeah.
So that then he towed it back to Ron's shop, so he wasn't wasting Ron's shop floor time.
Right.
And the engine was there. He had it delivered to an adjacent building that had a fork truck, and dropped it in the hole.
Yeah.
And I'm impressed that Novak's dimensions were spot on. We had to take off the passenger side exhaust manifold just to get it in. Right. That was more of an issue clearing some of the other hardware in the area and getting your hand down. Once it was on there, you put it back on. There was no problem. Oh, yeah, the last thing is exhaust is on you. What they give you is a shorty header block hugger style. Nice thing is it's V-man clamps, not regular exhaust clamps, so you can rotate it any way you want off the exhaust, off the end of the header. And then they give you short stubs. They give you 6-inch stubs.
Sweet.
And then you go to an exhaust shop and have them fab what you want, out the back, and put in the bungs for the forward O2s, bank 1, sensor 1, bank 2, sensor 1,
right.
Which are there for not EPA, but for fuel metering and being fuel trim. And he basically had them pretty much weld in a larger diameter but stock configuration from the YJ out the back. He went with a very large muffler, so that he said he wants to be able to trail crawl, in the woods and not scare everything away.
So he's got a sleeper.
It is, but when he gets his foot into it, it still talks.
You can hear it.
You can hear it. Yeah, he says, I'm not looking for roar. He says, he really was. He says, I'm looking for reliability, freeway power. Here in Florida, it's posted 70. You better not, if you're running 70, you better stay in the right lane because even the delivery trucks are going to pass you.
Yeah.
He wanted a little more oomph for trail climbing and that kind of stuff. And he has it now. And he has it in a very well configured, reliable system. We set it up for service as well so that anybody who knows how to change the oil in a GM product vehicle or, do any of that stuff should have no problem. Oh, by the way, the kit also included the fan, electric fan, and the relay system to trigger it and wired the connector already to the computer. So all we had to do is provide power to the relay and mount the relay. I mean, folks, it just had, I'm probably forgetting other things that were in the kit.
It was a turnkey power system. That's what we used to call them.
It is. It's about as close to turnkey as you can get.
Yeah.
Other side, I will take credit that having the factory service manual, and you guys are probably tired of hearing me say that, but I was able to quickly, print out several pages and decide, all right, this is instrumentation. It should be powered on the instrumentation circuit, so it comes on with the rest of the instruments and goes off with the rest of the instruments. And let's see, this is a good place to tap power. This is a good place to tap ground. Gee, that's there. Okay, what color is the speedometer cable?
Plaid.
Yeah, it's actually white with an orange stripe. Or is it orange with a white stripe? Can't tell.
It doesn't matter, but they're really, really close.
Yeah, and those kinds of things. And we were able to, even Bob got into it, he goes, oh, I'm beginning to see that now. I can look at this and look at the wiring and go, it's coming out of connector C107. That's, according to the picture, that's this one. Yes,
Bingo
it is.
Lollipop.
And then we can, there it is. Okay, so that's the one I need to take to this GM.
Yep.
Okay. And so we were just going through that kind of, overall system. So, folks, I don't know what else to add, and I hope this has been techie enough for those of you who like the techie. Again, you got specific questions about the kit, about the process, about an LS swap. This is probably my fourth LS swap I've assisted on, whether you call it project manager or just general fix the holes.
Hope.
Yeah, that too. It's a neat motor, okay, and I know a lot of people think it's overdone, but from a reliability standpoint, it's a good, solid motor that gives you good power, good economy, without overdoing the weight.
That's one of the... Okay, I can actually say it with this because if you go on Novak website,
there's information out there.
Even if you're not going to buy from their product, they have done a lot of research, and
they call it their knowledge base, folks.
Their knowledge base, and one of the things they talk about is that a handful of things.
Yeah.
First off is, hey, my buddy gave me a free engine. What do you think I should do? And as we covered, and even right now with Kevin's help with the steering box, sometimes free stuff costs you more money. Second of all is, let me use my AX5 transmission. I won't beat on it. Look again there, buds, because here's a situation where, again, they've done all the research for you about everything.
Yeah, one of their website pages is titled Research.
Yeah, and the last one is, why should I do a Chevy motor? Why not a Ford or a 318 or anything like that? And they basically say, look, the LS platform or the Chevy 350 platform is a very reliable motor. Everyone does them. Therefore, your parts availability are better. The aftermarket support is better. You want to be different? Wear a cool T-shirt.
Yeah.
Color your hair to purple. Don't go buy a Kubota diesel motor. Some people have done those. But stick with the mainstream because you'll be happier in the end.
Yeah. Let me point out one simple reason why LS is so very popular, aside from the technical, that it does produce good power, maintainable, etc.
Yeah.
GM builds their motors to go across a very, very broad platform of vehicles. All right. And this platform, this LS platform, in various guises, if you go in and look at the nomenclature of LM7s, LQ this, LV that,
the alphabet soup.
Yeah, alphabet soup of different motors, but they all are based on this same concept. And they all share basically one or two different ECM styles. over the years, the generational changes.
Right.
But GM kind of said, let's modularize our operational systems. So you do get down to where the GM motor, in its ultimate extreme, you can take an LS down to 5 wires and make it run. And when you go into their power distribution units, it's not far off that. Some of those 5 are broken into separate fuses just for maintenance.
Right.
But they get down to about 11 to 12 wires. And that 11 to 12 wires is consistent, whether it's in a GM, whether it's in a Chevy, whether it's in a Buick, whether it's in a European version.
Right.
Because they move their motors all over the place, they packaged it to be easy to connect. And what are we looking for when we buy a motor? Something that goes in and is easy to connect. Yeah. So there's a lot to be said. Now, you can use a Dodge motor, by all means. And if you pick the right ECU, it can even talk to a Jeep chassis. If you pick the wrong one, you can have a lot of fun trying to do the connections. And you can go for the wild and weirds. There's no problem with that.
Yeah.
But when you're people like Bob, who's looking for, I really just want a reliable Jeep. I love the way this is his quote, I love the YJ and the way it looks, but I'm tired of the way it drives.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. So we now have essentially a GM power plant, and he's just like, I walk out there and I hop in my old YJ and I turn the key and it goes vroom. I put it in gear and it goes zoom,
I put my foot down and it goes yeehaw.
And that's pretty much it. So for Bob, it was an ideal swap. For me, it was a great learning experience. It didn't have too many problems. We're still working through a few bugs. Like I said, a ticking out of the back of the transfer case or drive shaft. We did have to adjust, because of his lift, some shims in the spring packs, and get the pinion angles correct. But as far as, are we finding anything in the engine bay? Nope. So, again, 2 thumbs up to Novak. Great product. Good price, in my opinion. Very good price. Would I use them? Yeah, I'd consider it. I really would. I'm impressed with it. So, have fun, guys. Novak, you can get to them at www.novak-adapt.com. That's novak-adapt.com is their website. I highly recommend, as Scott said, even if you're not going to use them, I would consider them. Look at their research tab.
Yeah, they've done all the knowledge searching for you.
They have got just tons and tons and tons of data there, and they tell you the pros and cons. So even if you're junkyard building, you can go, well, I got this transmission. Okay, good. And they'll tell you, well, here's the good things about that transmission, and here are the weak spots. And, you're going, well, I'm going to hook it up to this transfer case, and you can look at that and they'll go, oops, nope, it don't.
Yeah, you might want to use this transfer case instead.
Yeah, kind of thing. So, again, anything else from you, Scott? I think I beat this one to a pulp.
Well, I think we're going to tease a couple little things for the next show coming up, because you even kind of thought a couple of things you might look into now.
Yep.
And I finally got my hands on a unicorn in a way that wasn't another Jeep, but as another part to a Jeep that kind of is going to be an interesting adaptation to Dory's Jeep. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But other than that, I think it's time we lock the hubs and put the Jeep in 4-low.
I think so, particularly after you talked to me about my transmission leak you saw dropping last time, and I got that pretty well sealed back up again.
Yeah.
So I won't be leaving little red dots down. Of course, I won't know how to go home then.
I need an adult.
So, folks, as we always say, please
wheel legal and tread lightly.
And take nothing but pictures, memories, and, of course, your trash when you leave the trail. We want to leave the trails for our kids and our kids' kids.
Absolutely. So have a fun time, and we'll catch you on the next show 119.
119. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Proceeding has been provided for entertainment only. Proper service and repair procedures are vital to the safe, reliable operation of all motor vehicles, as well as personal safety of those performing those repairs. Standard safety procedures and precaution, including the use of safety goggles and proper tools and equipment, should be followed at all times to eliminate the possibility of personal injury or improper service which could damage the vehicle or compromise its safety.
What he said. Thanks a lot for listening, guys. You guys have a great day.
Bye.
This has been a Bent Axle Media production.